Hello everyone, it's Miss Mangello, and tonight we're going to talk about heat, and specifically we're going to talk about how heat moves through phase changes. And we're also going to learn about which phase changes are exothermic and which phase changes are endothermic. So if you take a minute and look at what I have drawn on the screen, there are some things you're very familiar with in your everyday life. There's solid ice, and it melts to become liquid water. And then we have liquid water that will change to become steam. So when we look at these different phases, we ask ourselves to move from the solid to the liquid to the gas. Is this change in the phase of the water, is this exothermic or endothermic? So in order to go from solid ice to liquid water, we've got to be able to make it hotter. We've got to be able to make it hotter, and we'll have to do the same when we look at liquid water in comparison to steam. We've got to be able to make it hotter. So let's spend our time trying to figure out which way heat has to be added to the system in order to be able to make it change phases. So the best way to represent this is to show that the heat is going into the system. So you can see I added a little bit more to our drawing. So I used arrows to represent the direction that heat is moving. So this will show that heat is moving into the ice in order to change it from solid to the liquid, because we had to make it hotter. So it could be possibly heat from a stove, it could be heat from the sun, it could be heat from a fire, but nonetheless the heat is moving into the system. So we're saying here that heat is moving from the environment into the ice, and then again the heat has to move into the water, because the heat has to continue to enter the system in order for the system to be able to change and go through the phases. So if you were to use fancier words, the heat moves from the environment into the system. And again, we're saying that the heat is moving from the surroundings into the system, being the ice, from the surroundings into the water, all of these things to create phase changes. When all of this takes place, we say that this type of heat direction and movement causes an endothermic situation. So now that I've fixed my handwriting and my spelling, it is endothermic when heat is being entered from the environment into the system to make a phase change. So in order to sum up this endothermic process, it's always most important to evaluate the direction in which the heat is moving. So the heat has to move from the environment into the system. The heat is being added into the system. The system is consuming or using or absorbing the heat in order to make the phase changes. Okay, so now let's look at the opposite situation where we have steam condensing. It's the word for when the steam, the vapors condense to go to liquid water, and then when we go from liquid water to solid ice. So again, for this situation, we have to be able to make it colder as we go through our phase changes. But let's try not to focus on this idea of making it colder, but rather the direction that the heat moves. So if we want to move from the situation where we have to steam to a liquid, we need to move the heat out of the system. So we're going to use arrows again to indicate that this time the direction of the heat will be out of the system and into the environment. So maybe the situation for the heat to be leaving the system is that we have put these things into a refrigerator or freezer so that the heat can move out of the system and into the environment. So again, the heat has to leave this situation, the steam, in order to change into liquid. And in order for the liquid to turn into a solid, heat has to leave. So to finish up our comments on phase changes going from steam to liquid to solid, remember the heat has to move out of the system and into the surroundings in order for the steam to turn to liquid and the liquid to turn to ice, and we call this process an exothermic process. So tonight we've spent time talking about an exothermic process and an endothermic process. And if we were to compare the two, in summary, in order to melt something or boil it, heat has to go into the situation, into the system, and we say the heat goes in, or the process is endothermic. And in order for something to condense or to freeze, heat has to come out of the system, and we call that exothermic. Thank you.